Welcome to Running on Ice, the coolest community in freight. I'm your host, Mary O'Connell, bringing you the latest tech updates, warehouse news, and everything happening in the cold chain world. Not only is there the coolest show in freight, but there's also Running on Ice, a newsletter that could not be colder. You can subscribe to that on freightwaves.com/runningonIce. Today, we welcome back Charles Betts, National Sales Manager at Interstate Cold Storage. Welcome back, Charles.
Hello. Thanks for having me.
I'm excited to get back into it today. We're kind of touching on some of the I'm not going to call them like hot takes of the industry, but some of the lesser talked about things that I think is kind of happening. So without further ado, let's just dive right in. So something that's interesting, specifically in the cold storage world, is that, on the dry van side of things, there's like warehouse space is at a premium. There's all this extra inventory. People are saying it's starting to mimic, COVID era levels when shippers were just pulling anything forward that they could. So that way they had inventory on hand because consumers were just buying. Now they're pulling things forward. Consumers aren't buying as much, but they do need that warehouse space. But on the cold storage side, that's not necessarily the case, right?
Yeah, it's hard to really tell because the trends tend to come out, get dissected, and there's certain companies that will take en masse data from cold storages around the country, even internationally. I happen to like the Global Cold Chain Alliance a lot. Right now is about the time of year that we start inputting data from last year. So there's kind of a blind spot right now. It's a good time to talk about it because it's probably not very published data. It's stuff that we're starting to gather, and it still has to be sliced and diced. So in terms of cold storage capacity, I can tell you a little bit about what I'm hearing from customers. And, we work with Interstate Cold Storage works with, even though we're in India and Ohio, we work with companies that are based on the West Coast, the East Coast, the South, the North. So it really is sort of a national discussion and how that impacts us. But we also have access because we do trade shows, and you can hear some discussions as to what in cold storage is going on a national level. So a lot of it's hearsay, but I'm pretty confident in that hearsay, and that capacity is down significantly. And it's definitely an anomaly within cold storage with throughput and turns and just on-hand availability.
I think that don't get me wrong, I love hearsay as much as anyone else. I love a good industry gossip mill. But it stands to reason that if everyone is making these comments and everyone's making these claims, it's no longer just, okay, well, here's like a handful of people that are saying it. But if you're seeing it kind of across and in different markets, that's a pretty good sign of what to come. So it'll be interesting in a couple months whenever that data for this time period right now is published. It's kind of curious to see like if that will back it up or if it's just kind of like a little anecdote that everybody's like, oh yeah, we're just seeing low inventory levels. But I would imagine that the data for sure would back that up whenever it's released.
Yeah. And I mean, all of cold storage, if you're taking product over the road or shipping containers, you're on the forefront of a lot of things that's going on politically. There's a lot of things going on with, during COVID, during the pandemic and shutdowns. You rely on hearsay. Unfortunately, it's not science. You rely on some places that you heard didn't have enough staff and they're shutting down because in a week, that means you probably are going to have less, you're probably going to be taking less inbounds later that same week or even that same day, which means you're going to either have available space or you're going to need to keep that schedule somewhat clear because they're going to send a bunch of stuff out as soon as they get reopened. That's how we serve the food marketplace, is we're sort of taking food from manufacturers and sending it out to their retail and food service partners. So it is a lot of hearsay, and we get used to it. You get pretty good at separating the reality from the BS. But every once in a while you get burned. But I'm pretty confident what I'm hearing is across the board in industry wide.
Yeah, because you got that, you got the multiple sources, you know? If you have multiple people saying it, it's kind of more validating than if you just have one or two and then maybe, oh, just this industry is having problems or just this one sector of it is gonna experience some struggle. But if it's kind of like everybody's saying it, then, it's gotta be true, you know?
And some of there's different trade shows that you can attend, and it's encouraged to have these open conversations with moderators, and you start hearing a theme. And everybody wants to have a firewall in competition, and people have NDAs in place, but you can speak at a general level regarding what's going on in our industry, especially at these trade shows. And that's where I get most of my most current data, right? There's the nose of the airplane, and then there's the altitude. My concern right now, and I think everybody's concern on the cold storage side, is where the nose of the airplane is, because we're probably into month 8, 9, or 10 of pitch down. And we're still at a pretty good altitude, but it would be overall, it would be good for everyone who has a dependence on food. If we started to see stock and safety stock start to increase.
Yeah, that's we just like to know what direction the plane could potentially be crashing from. Call it old fashioned. I just like to know, are we going up or are we just how quickly are we approaching the ground, and is there still time to pull up? But the inventory levels is something that you mentioned that's kind of interesting, and it's that it's almost back to very reminiscent of me and during the COVID era. I was on the dry van side of things, so I didn't have a lot of exposure to the cold storage or the temperature controlled world. And it's kind of feeling right now on the temperature controlled side that it's very reminiscent of that early 2021, like the summer of 2021, where as soon as something's coming into the warehouse, it's going out, and that throughput is crazy high and inventory levels are low. Is that kind of what you guys are seeing, that, even though inventory levels are down, things just aren't sitting in a warehouse? They're just moving as fast as they can come in.
Yes, I don't think it's as drastic, but I think it's been prolonged enough that if the trend continues, we may get back into a situation where we're vulnerable to the next big thing that could disrupt supply chain, and whether those be tariffs or another pandemic. And everybody's talking about different things. That's the big thing now, right? Everybody talks about what's the lurking threat to business. But I think the turns are definitely up, and I think they're up across the country. I think throughput is similar or slightly elevated, and when you do that, it means there's less on hand. I mean, it's the iron triangle of throughput, on hand, and turns. So if you're going to turn product faster, you're going to have, unless you dramatically increase at the same rate, the throughput, you're just going to have less on hand. I think it's a cost saving measure. And to that degree, I would applaud the efforts, because we're all trying to figure out, deflation is not necessarily healthy, but it's certainly wanted when you've had food inflation at 28 to 30% over 5 years, right? Getting back to baseline of 1% is still pretty sick compared to where we were. There's still a lot of bruising left from that. So I think that what people would like to see is maybe to get some money back of that increase and get some costs down. And I can tell you, there's some really great contacts out there on LinkedIn. That's really what they bring to the table. Supply chain was a great place to be for the past 5 years, but the folks that are specialists at cost mitigation and different ways of looking at it are really a high value contact right now. And having your food product spend less time in storage is one way to ultimately lower your pallet cost over duration of time.
I mean, that makes sense because if you are looking to, because if you want to reduce your costs, obviously that pallet not sitting in a warehouse is going to be great because it's going to get sold faster and it means you're going to have to not really pay for storage of it. But then also if it moves faster, those strawberries, those start wilting, and some of those fresh produce that starts wilting and, going bad the second it's pulled off of the vine, the tree, whatever it grew on, the second it leaves its growing environment, that shelf life begins. And so I think the faster there almost has to be a balance between how quickly can I get something to the consumer, to the market, so that way I'm not potentially wasting product, but also how do I still have enough back stock that if something happens and I can't get something there just in time, or if we have another unprecedented once in a lifetime global change event, like how do we still protect it against that? Because the last thing you want is to have nothing that you can put on the shelf, because that's going to hurt more than having to pay for a couple pallets in a warehouse.
One of the things that I see is some of the requests for product that comes from our customer's customer, right? So at Interstate Cold Storage, they really want the board, our ownership, we're privately owned. They would like the management team to be very involved throughout the process. So I try and monitor a lot of the email traffic. And so I can say with some confidence that over the past 5 months, I've been seeing a lot more of those requests for product that aren't even in stock. They've been depleted. They're already allocated. There's always a difference between on-hand inventory and available inventory. It's on hand, it's just not available because it's already allocated to other orders you put in yesterday and the day before but haven't picked up yet, right? There's always a little difference between when the title owner of product releases the goods and what date it's estimated to leave the building versus when the carrier can actually provide the asset to pick it up. So those POs drift a day or two. So you can tell it's getting a little frantic with inventory when people are cutting POs to their customers based on hand, but not available because they're reading the charts wrong. And it's getting to that point again. That was a very common thing during COVID. And that's expensive because somebody from your company, and probably from the carrier side too, is involved in a whole lot of emails to understand that while the product is here, it's just not available. You're double cutting on that product. And it takes a lot of labor, time, and effort to get through that. So you can start losing efficiencies by turning your product too fast.
Yeah. Because it's that whole it's like when you go in for a reservation and or everyone at the restaurant has a reservation and there's an empty table and they're like, oh well, we don't have available tables for you, and you see 6 open tables and you're like, well, there's a table right there, it's empty. It's like, yes, but that's reserved for the people that are coming in later. And so it's like, but the table's empty and it's right there, I could just sit down. And it's like, no, but it's marked for somebody else. And I mean, that's half the battle of inventory management, isn't it? Making sure that you have enough to meet your orders, and then hope that nobody needs more sometimes.
And I will tell you that I see a lot of customers say, we'll get back to you, and then request an inbound. And then that product comes in fresh off the line. You know that they had to retool the line, or they had to go and tell everybody to stay late to get that load out. It becomes inefficient. Literally, if you have to roll off the line to send it to cold storage to send it out, there's cost involved with that. And there's a lot of that going on right now. And I mean nationwide, not even necessarily just with our customers. It's happening. There's a lot of requests for orders for, same day orders, which is, in cold storage, there's not a lot of that. Most orders are a week out, 2 days, 3 days, 4 days. So it's becoming a little bit inefficient. We're hearing some grumblings of out of stock and some challenges. And there's a lot more emergencies on inbound and outbound than you would expect for not being as full as cold storages are. It's really not a cold storage issue. It's a supplier issue of just running inventory thin.
Yeah. Which I can't necessarily blame suppliers at the moment because, I too would be looking to cut some costs.
Yeah, for sure.
But also on the side of not necessarily cutting costs, um, is that we've seen all the people that work in these warehouse and these cold storage facilities. The labor market has been a little difficult because not only is it warehousing, which is historically, notably one of the hardest jobs to fill, but it's cold storage warehouse. So
Yeah.
it's warehousing, but work in a freezer.
Yeah.
And I just know that as someone who's perpetually always cold, sign me right up for that.
Yeah.
Um, but the labor market there has improved, and there hasn't been as many like we're desperate for anyone that has a CDL and a winter parka. Like come one, come all. But it's actually kind of seeing a bit of a recovery, is it not?
It is. And I think where that's the most evident, the Global Cold Chain Alliance does a good job of asking about, separating out your labor when you're reporting in your data. And so you've got your direct, you've got your temps. And, one thing we've seen in the industry is that it used to be kind of a 12 to 15% outsourced, meaning temporary staffing kind of market. And during COVID, in particular, 21, 22, it got all the way up to 18 or 28%, excuse me. That's really, really high. It's almost double the amount of people who are temps. And you're trying to get them on realistically because you need the people. I mean, let's think about your hierarchy. You want to bring them on, you want to have them hired because labor's at a premium and you need people, but you're struggling. And so you start using a staffing company, thereby raising your cost per employee, but having access to more employees. And your goal is to get them hired over as quickly as possible. And the quality of labor has diminished so badly that you can't even after 90 days bring some of these folks on. So they're kind of just this rotational. It became like 80% of the outsourced industry was this rotational industry that you wouldn't bring on and wasn't great labor, which is very inefficient. Well, that's the first thing. That's the tip, again, tip of the airplane, nose of the airplane, but tip of the iceberg, what you want to say. It's really the contact point that tells you what's going on, because that's diminished as of 2023, the backside, that went down into the mid-teens again. I think for the year, it was like 19%, but it fell from 28 to 19 for the year. But the interesting thing is, from what I can tell on our side, it was very Q4 relief based. Q1, Q2 were still high, sort of slammed the brakes on a lot of big stuff happening. And suddenly there was a lot of applicants about mid-year. It seemed like it took about 3, 4, 5 months, and all of a sudden applications started rolling in. So outsourcing really did slow down in 23. I would suspect you'll see back to 12% on the low side historically. In terms of regular labor, the quality of applicants that we're getting has increased. Better history, less job hopping. And by job hopping, I mean, 5 years, 6 job kind of, that's pretty substantial job hopping. A better skill set on a forklift. There's people who are certified and there's people that are really, really good and certified. And we're starting to see people that already have good practices in place, and we're not starting over from scratch, so to speak, even though they're certified.
That's got to be, first of all, it's got to be nice that all of a sudden you turn around, and not necessarily all of a sudden, but you're starting to see this turn of those more qualified candidates, the better choices just being there. And I mean, I think that's great. Has it, as a result of kind of this increased in qualified good talent, has that kind of allowed you guys to expand some of the different service offerings, or has it just kind of let you lean back and go like, okay, we can breathe. We have staffing in the
Yeah.
warehouses. We're good.
Yeah. Right.
Like, just nobody think about it. Nobody talk
Totally
about
get
it. Just let it go.
Yeah, that was 23, I think, on that back half, where you still didn't want to necessarily offer the services yet that were a little bit more labor intensive, because you didn't trust the market. It just seemed like you got lucky for 3 months in a row with some good candidates. But I think once you've gotten past the 90-day 120 mark with your direct hires, and they're fitting in culturally, and you know if they're going to stick and stay, you start feeling a little bit more comfortable. So I would say for at least in Indiana and Ohio, where interstate cold storage is, I say we're well into eighth, ninth month of serious labor recovery. And therefore, I would say we started feeling much more comfortable with case picking, catch weight recording, just things that require a deeper understanding of your RF guns and good practices. As simple as it is, catch weight recording is not super easy because you can double scan or you can forget cases, and you need to have a good system to make sure you're doing them quickly, but you're doing them accurately. They're getting fed into the system. You've got a decent looking, something other than a hand tally, right? Of all these, it could be 1,200, 2,000 cases on a load that you're recording the case weight to the decimal point of all these cases. How do you do that efficiently? That's a lot of labor. That's hours and hours of labor, of man labor. So it might be 3 guys working 2 hours, it might be 1 guy working 5 hours, who knows? But people who walk in the door and know how to do that efficiently, or even bring ideas to the table and say, oh, this other place, we did this, and that was really more efficient than how you're doing it. What a blessing that is. That's tremendous, right? We've gotten to that point. So we've kind of reopened the barn doors, so to speak, on services that we know are a 4x multiplier in terms of how long it takes to get it done versus just normal handling, running pallets through the building.
That has to be like a huge, like, kind of like a scary moment of like, you've made it through like 6 months, you have all these new workers, and you're like, let's just try to offer something. And like, you're just like peeking out the door, like, okay, I guess I can open it a little bit more.
Yeah.
And then, because I'm sure you guys didn't just go like, oh, great, they're here. Whoosh. Anybody can request anything they want now.
No, yeah. So that's where on the sales side or customer service side, if you know your accounts, like you should know your accounts, you have a list in your head of particular customers that need a particular amount of service, and they're not gonna flood the market with that service. They just need it for certain consignees, for instance. Maybe it's placarding of pallets, and maybe it's, who knows. But you start with those guys first, because they might be 1,000 pallet customer, but they're only hurting on 2 loads every other day that leave your building that need a little bit of high case pick rate or something. That's where you test the waters, is with those customers, and then you eventually, it's a wide open space, right? And I think we've gotten to that point where it's a wide open space. You still have to understand your building and your overall labor, right? For instance, with higher turns, and just when I say higher turns, I did pull some national data. Again, according to Global Cold Chain Alliance, the capacity has gone from, in 2021, from 79%. Now, this includes all buildings that report to Global Cold Chain Alliance. So I'm assuming I think that was around 600 warehouses. But there's 5 deep warehouses, 4 deep, 3 deep, 2 deep, single deep. There's a lot of single deep. A lot of the newer buildings are single deep. So they can run 100% full. But a 4 deep warehouse in the racking with drive-in racking can't run more than 80%. So when I say these numbers, just bear in mind that 100% would be way over full. It's probably 85% max is where you could be. So according to Global Cold Chain Alliance, it was 79% in 2021. 2022 throughput was starting to really go crazy as everybody was getting over the pandemic. It was at 72%. You saw a little bit of a rundown. 2023 was at 73%. Data's not in for 2024. It probably won't be for another four months. But I think you're going to see about an 8 to 12% drop to a very low historic number, somewhere probably around 60 to 62% across the nation. Now, functionally, that would probably point more towards 80 to 85% full in terms of your functionality. But I think most places have the ability to be doing more business. if they have the labor. Now that's the building. The building can do more business, but you need to have the labor because the throughput is, to us, slightly elevated. I think for most people it's on par or elevated. So you have to have this mix, right, of not just the building, but you have to have the appointments, the labor, the material handling equipment. The MHE is a big deal because it's still recovering from those chips. And it's not as bad as it was when it was 80 weeks out to get a forklift. I mean, I think we're down to 20 weeks or 16 weeks. So it's almost recovered, but it was the last thing I think to recover from the supply chain issues as were cars.
And it's fun. Like, it's just gonna be, let's see how everything is. I look forward to seeing how accurate your shot call is. Can't wait for Global Cold Chain Alliance to release their data for 2024, and we'll have to call you back and see, hey, how accurate were you? I think you're
Yeah.
gonna be pretty spot on though.
I'm hoping, and it's again, that's where that conjecture rumor mill stuff is, but it's going to be there's a lot more opportunity. The supply chain is stronger. There's more warehouses than there has been. Labor has recovered. There's definitely more full-time in-house direct labor per pallets than there has been in years. So we're in a great spot to take care of an upswing in demand when that happens.
Yeah. Speaking of being in a great spot, Charles, the question that I have for you today is, if you could build a house out of any type of food, what would you choose?
Dark chocolate would be great because I could bust off like a shutter and go buy a new car with it because cocoa's so expensive. Like a nice I don't ask for much, like a 5-bedroom, 4-bath with a full veranda made of chocolate, dark cocoa, 85%, not that 60% crap. I'm talking full dark chocolate. It's the highest value stuff. It is so ridiculous where chocolate's at.
Okay, so you wouldn't want to pay to build the dark chocolate house.
No. I think you were giving me the house. You weren't
Okay.
talking about supply costs. I think it was just if I had a house. Ownership was implied as part of the deal. Right?
Got it. Okay.
Yeah. If I had to build a house right now, oh gosh, like balsa wood, I don't know, sand.
I'd probably make it out of like matzah, like not matzah bread, like the flat like flour water cracker.
Let's have like matzah.
Yeah, maybe that is matzah.
You might be naan bread.
No, I'm thinking of something crispier than naan bread.
No, but I'm saying naan bread would also be pretty good because then you could just like a little dip. You wouldn't have to have stuff on house. You could just be dipping all the time. Just break off a little drywall.
I love to dip.
Yeah. Who doesn't?
Like get me a nice garlicky tzatziki. Done.
Yes.
Game over.
Yeah. I need some tzatziki. Baba ganoush. Baba ganoush. Smoked. Gotta be smoked eggplant.
Okay. I have not had smoked baba ganoush. I'm gonna have to. There's a place down by my house that I'm sure probably has it.
Fantastic.
So we just always get the regular because it comes in like a appetizer sampler platter of all the delicious things. But anyway, so if someone's got a great line on a house full of dark chocolate that you don't have to pay for, or if they have any kind of questions about anything we've talked about today, where can they find you outside the show?
Yeah, you can email me at charles.betts, B-E-T-T-S, my last name, at interstatecoldstorage.com. It's the best way to get a hold of me. And, you don't have to want to store with us. I help people all the time create relationship by finding them storage where I know they have other good guys doing what I do across the country. That's more centric to where they're looking. I'm happy to help.
Awesome. You guys heard it here first. Charles is the man for all cold storage needs, whether you need him or one of his friends. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. Really appreciate it. And these are conversations that I think need to be had. And I really am glad that there's this format. And I'm not just a guest now and then. I'm a listener too.
Well, I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
You can catch other episodes of Running on Ice right here on FreightWaves TV, YouTube, or anywhere you get your podcasts like Apple Podcast and Spotify. Need more Running on Ice news? No sweat. Subscribe to the newsletter on freightwaves.com/runningonIce. See you on the internet. I just bashed my knee into the desk. That hurt. Okay, I'm fine. The huh? Yeah. Let's go.